Stoicism. In its purest form, it's the art of not getting bogged down by life's inevitable chaos. The Stoics believed that a wise person could face any challenge, whether it's being stuck in traffic or enduring a global crisis, and still come out the other side relatively unscathed. And as we all know, that's much easier said than done, isn't it? One of the big names in Stoicism, because of course philosophy has its celebrities too, is that of Marcus Aurelius. The guy wasn't just some philosopher in a toga sitting in a library all day sipping wine while pondering the great mysteries of life. Nope. He was the emperor of Rome. You know, the guy with the power to order people around, have lavish feasts, and throw around wealth like it was confetti. And yet, he still spent his spare time writing down his thoughts. Not about Roman politics or the latest empire expansion, but about how to be a decent human being in a world that wasn't exactly offering that many examples of what that looked like. Because, surprise, surprise, running an empire isn't all fun and games. Marcus didn't write meditations for anyone else. He didn't sit down with the intention of creating some life-changing text that would be passed down through the generations. Oh no. He was writing it for himself. Something like his personal therapy journal. Can you imagine? The emperor of the known world sitting down and journaling about how to keep his calm when everything around him was burning down. It's almost as if he was too busy conquering the world to let his emotions run wild. Because, well, there were no timeouts in ancient Rome. And boy, did Marcus Aurelius have his fair share of stress to deal with. Let's take a look at his personal life. This wasn't just the I can't find my favourite toga type of stress. He had wars to fight, and power struggles in his own court. It wasn't exactly a serene, peaceful existence. One particularly dramatic example was when he had to deal with the plague, a deadly break of smallpox that ravished the Roman Empire during his reign. Imagine running an empire while your people are literally dropping dead. And you're trying to manage that while your armies are fighting wars on multiple fronts. Talk about a bad day at the office. And if that wasn't enough, his personal life wasn't exactly a bed of roses either. His wife was not what you'd call a model of virtue. In fact, Marcus often wondered if he was even loved by her at all. But instead of wallowing in self-pity or seeking a distraction through luxurious pleasures, he simply faced the reality of the situation. In his meditations, he writes about accepting the imperfections of others. What is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee. A rather succinct way of saying people are going to be people, and sometimes they're not going to meet your expectation, but it's your job to rise above it. Can you imagine applying that when someone cuts you off in traffic? Instead of stewing in anger, just accept that they're doing their thing and you're doing yours. But here's the kicker. Marcus Aurelius could have had anything he wanted, and I mean anything. He had the empire at his fingertips. Luxury, power, glory, all of it. He could have spent his days hoarding wealth, throwing extravagant parties, and living a life of indulgence. In fact, many emperors before him did exactly that. But Marcus, well, he didn't want it. He wasn't interested in drowning himself in material pleasures. He knew that these things were fleeting and ultimately unsatisfying. In his writings, he talks about the futility of chasing after things that give but momentary pleasure and don't contribute to one's long-term peace of mind. He even wrote that the art of living is more like wrestling than dancing. It's a matter of being able to stand firm and remain unperturbed by the distractions of life. He wasn't looking to be entertained. He wanted to be resilient. So, while other emperors might have splurged on jewels and grand banquets, Marcus kept it simple, valuing virtue over vanity and inner peace over outer indulgence. One of the most famous and relatable moments of his personal struggles comes from his reflections on other people's behaviour. He wasn't immune to frustration with the less than ideal people he encountered. In fact, he often found himself battling with his own emotions, as anyone might when surrounded by incompetence and rudeness. He writes about being irritated by the behaviour of others. How much time you have to waste on quarrelling with people who are trying to do what they think is best. Instead of holding on to that frustration, Marcus reminded himself that people act according to their nature, and it's not his job to change them. Sound familiar? It's like when you're in the middle of a conversation with someone and you're thinking, this is going nowhere. But then you remind yourself, okay, I don't have to save this conversation, I can just let it go. But perhaps one of the most striking anecdotes comes when he reflects on his relationship with his family, specifically with his son, who tragically turned out to be a less than ideal heir. Marcus was deeply troubled by his son's inability to live up to the Stoic virtues that he valued. Imagine pouring your heart and soul into teaching your son the ways of wisdom, only for him to go off the rails and start indulging in reckless behaviour. Marcus couldn't exactly force the dude to become stoic, and in his meditations he expressed disappointment in his son's lack of discipline. He didn't blame him, but rather he blamed himself for not being the kind of father who could inspire a better example. How's that for guilt? It's like when you try and teach someone the value of patience and they end up throwing a tantrum in a supermarket. Yet, in the midst of all his personal struggles and turmoil, Marcus continually reminded himself that inner peace and integrity depended on how he chose to respond. It wasn't external events that mattered. It was how he handled them. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. This isn't just some motivational quote from a meme. This is the real deal. Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. He recognized that life can throw some awful challenges at you, but it's your response to them that ultimately defines who you are. Let's talk about death. You didn't think Marcus Aurelius was all about keeping his cool and ignoring his problems, did you? No. The guy faced some harsh truths. He was no stranger to the idea of death, and much like a good Stoic, he had a rather, shall we say, pragmatic approach to it. Death was, after all, inevitable. He didn't shy away from it or see it as some great mysterious calamity. Instead, he kind of embraced it as a natural part of life. As he wrote, "Death is the removal of a great weight, and life is a battle, a contest of endurance." That's right, folks. The Emperor of Rome thought of life as a bit of a slog, a necessary evil. But unlike most of us, at least, who shy away from the thought of death, Marcus didn't see it as something to fear. He continually reminded himself that death is not something to run from, but rather something to be accepted. After all, it's going to happen one way or another, and it's not up to us to choose when or how. What we do now echoes in eternity, he writes, urging himself, and by extension all of us, to make the most of the time we do have. Death in his eyes wasn't the great unknown, it was simply a transition. He talks about the body like wearing a coat that will wear out and eventually be discarded. Just like we don't mourn the coat when it's no longer useful, we shouldn't mourn the end of our lives when our bodies have done their work. So, with death in mind, Marcus Aurelius pushed himself to live with purpose and meaning, because as he saw it, the purpose of life wasn't to chase after fleeting pleasures or accumulate wealth. It was to live virtuously and to contribute to the world in whatever way we could. Death would eventually come for him, just as it will for all of us. And rather than fear it, or let it paralyze him, Marcus embraced it as a natural part of the human condition. I mean, he didn't want to die, no one does, but he understood that it was inevitable, and therefore his focus wasn't on prolonging life for the sake of it. Instead, his energy went into making sure that the life he lived was the one of integrity, kindness, and purpose. One of the most famous pieces of advice Marcus Aurelius gives is, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Now, that's not exactly exactly a warm, fuzzy way to start your day, is it? But Marcus isn't trying to make you feel good about yourself. He's helping you prepare for the inevitable challenges. Because guess what? Life doesn't owe you a smooth ride. His point was this, that by preparing for the worst, you're better equipped to handle it with calm and poise. This from the man who probably had to dodge a few palace intrigues himself. Poor guy, huh? At the end of the day, Marcus Aurelius' writings show us that Stoicism isn't about avoiding the mess of life. It's about how we deal with it. It's about finding peace in the chaos and not letting the external world disturb your inner equilibrium. He wasn't perfect. Far from it. But like any good philosopher, he worked at it every day. Even when the Roman Empire was falling apart. So next time you find yourself in a less than ideal situation, be it traffic or dealing with that one colleague who always seems to be just a little bit too much, just remember, if Marcus Aurelius could keep his cool while running the largest empire in history, maybe you can too, or at least you can try. And I hope you've enjoyed this. Have a great day. I love you.